The Duelist Cup is starting today. And so we're going to play a little bit, of course. We're going to play some Duelist Cup. But before, I thought it was a good time because there's been a new set. There's been new cards in Master Duel. It's a new format. And the Duelist Cup now grants you a qualification to the World Championship. We're gonna create a tier list of the current Master Duel meta, my impression of the current Master Duel format, what are good decks, what are bad decks, but it's gonna have some flavor of specifically for the Duelist Cup, right? Because as someone who has done the grind for Worlds before in Master Duel, I felt like it would be good to share some of my insights and some of my ideas of the current Master Duel format. And the big deal is the second stage, because the second stage is limited in time, right? It's 72 hours. It's a 72-hour grind, essentially, where you are ideally playing as much as you can and winning as much as you can, which can be very stressful. So just as a disclaimer, if anyone is trying to qualify for Worlds through the Duelist Cup, first in the world is going to be a crazy grind. You should absolutely be aware before you go into it. You need to make sure that you actually want to do that. With that in mind, we're going to evaluate these decks, not only on how good are they in Master Duel right now, but also how good are they going to be in the Duelist Cup second stage, because there are certain points in the second stage where you want your deck to do a specific thing, and that's not only tied to its overall win rate, right? When we evaluate a deck for ranked, for example, in order to get to Master 1, all you need is a certain win rate and a certain number of games. In the second stage of the Duelist Cup, the amount of time a deck takes to win also matters a whole lot, right? That is, for example, one of the reasons why in the last Worlds qualifier, after like the first or second day, I switched off of Tier Limits. Even though Tier Limits was definitely the best deck, I realized that, dude, my wins are taking way too long to have a chance in this grind because other people just climb faster than I do, even if they have lower win rates. So that is just one of the small things that we're going to be taking into account. Pearly, Kashtira, and Labyrinth. I think these three decks are the top three. However, with Pearly, one of my issues here is, honestly, in a regular ranked setting, I think Pearly is the most powerful out of those three decks. However, I think for the Duelist Cup, one thing that holds Pearly back is that Pearly is definitely the slowest out of these three. I think it is going to be tough to go the entire Duelist Cup with it because it takes a long time to win if you play every turn optimally. And it also has the problem where it's very, very exhausting. When you put those two things together, deck is very slow and deck is very exhausting when you play it for a long, long time. I think Pearly is only a solid deck for this Duelist Cup. I think you can play it, but I don't think you should play it for the majority of your climb. General advice for this Duelist Cup is you should have several decks prepared. You should not rely on one specific deck throughout the entire thing, simply because you might notice halfway through that what your initial idea was is not working out and that you should switch decks in some way, shape, or form. I think there is certainly going to be moments in the Duelist Cup where it's going to be smart to whip out Pearly because you realize people aren't really playing outs to Noir and have to just scoop to it, because then it's significantly faster. If people just see you make a fat Noir on turn 1 and then scoop, then it's okay, right? I do think Kashtira, I'm gonna put it into the best decks category. It's kind of like Pearly, but it's a lot faster, especially in the early stages. Like on the first or second day, Kashtira is going to be phenomenal. But even if I put a deck like Kashtira in the best category, that does not mean that you should be playing it all the time in the Duelist Cup. There's still going to be phases where people will prepare for Kashtira. Like if everyone is playing Kashtira at the higher stages, people are just going to bring decks that beat it, which is not that hard. Kashtira doesn't have Omni negates. People can go blind second against it, play Thrust, Talons, Kaijus, whatever, OTK you. It's not that difficult to counter Kashtira if everyone is playing Kashtira. Josh is gaslighting everyone to win a second Worlds in a row. Dude, I'm already qualified. That's the beauty about this thing. I can actually give you all of my insights. I don't care at all what happens. I'm in no pressure situation right now. I literally have no incentive whatsoever to hold any information back. This is genuinely how I feel about every single one of these decks. Lab, I think, is somewhere in between the two. I think Lab is sometimes very fast because sometimes your opponents just realize they can't beat it and they die on the second turn. Like if you go first, solid setup, or flip a floodgate, the game literally ends immediately. Going second most of the time is a pretty long grind. The one thing that I like about Labyrinth is that if Kashtira is very, very popular, people are going to shotgun their maxis and draw phase, which is very good for Lab. It's very advantageous if your opponent just loses that maxi for pretty much no reason. Even though it's not amazing against Labyrinth, maxi is still a good card, right? It's still gonna draw 1 or 2 cards when you go for your big welcome plays and so on and so forth. So your opponent wasting that card is pretty good for you. Labyrinth is also relatively adjustable, right? You can play a lot of hand traps in it if you want to counter specific strategies. You can also play a lot of outs to certain cards. Like you have access to the Daruma Cannon now, which outs Noir. However, Pearly is a pretty bad matchup for it going second. But I do think that if you have some practice on Labyrinth, you know when you can scoop up a game relatively early. When you go second against a certain field, at the higher stages of the second stage of the Duelist Cup, you can assume your opponent is somewhat competent. You can look at your hand and you can be like, yeah, at this point, I'll activate my Welcome Lab, and if they have an Ash, it's over, and I can just go next, right? And that is something maybe on ranked you would play out these games and see if you top deck out of it, but in the Duelist Cup, I think there's a lot of situations where you can scoop with Labyrinth when you know it's lost. Whereas a deck like Kashtira very often has situations where, oh my god, if this next card that I draw is a Fenrir or a Birth or a Unicorn, I'm absolutely still in it, so I need to wait if I can draw it. Lab usually doesn't have that. You can tell when it's lost, which is an advantage in a timed environment, right? And that's the situation on like the top 3. So let's talk about the rest of the format and some of the decks that I think are sleeper picks in this current format, because I do think there are some ways to maybe exploit the current metagame. However, one deck that I 100% do not advise you to play is Sky Striker. Rika is a mid deck. I don't think the deck is that great in Master Duel right now, even though I lost to it in the freaking Challenger Cup last Friday. The question is basically, will my opponent scoop if I normal summon Loci? Because if they are concerned about playing as fast as possible, they theoretically should just pack it up when they see the Loci. You don't want to watch a 5 to 10 minute plant combo to then just lose anyways. So whereas on ranked, you might let them play out the combo and try to play into it, I think in the Duelist Cup setting, a lot of people, if they see there's no chance to win because the plant combo is going off, they might just surrender. You might think that's not realistic, but from my personal experience last time in the Worlds qualifiers, that did happen. When I played against Tearlaments, I went second. I didn't have a hand trap in my Sprite deck, and I saw them popping off. I scooped instant. Vice versa, when I went for my full Sprite combo and they didn't have a hand trap and they knew they weren't able to beat Avramax plus Herald of the Orange Light, they also surrendered just to save time. But not everyone. That's a problem for Rika. Hand traps are a problem for Rika. Going second are a problem for Rika. So I don't know if it has a consistent win rate that's fast enough for this second stage of the Duelist Cup, but it's not awful. That's why I'm putting it in mid. Tearlaments, I'm gonna put it in don't. I think Tearlaments is at a very similar spot to the TCG actually, where it was pretty much dead for months, and now that a Rise Art is banned, it's kind of coming back. And I think Master Duel can be in a kind of similar situation. Like when they ban a Rise Art eventually, maybe we can play Tearlaments again. Right now in this Duelist Cup, I wouldn't recommend it, because even if you do hit a good matchup, it's still gonna take a long time. In ranked, you can still have some fun with it, especially if you don't get paired against Kashtira, but I would not recommend Tearlaments for this Duelist Cup. Neither would I recommend Drytron. Branded, I personally think is a somewhat mid deck in Master Duel right now. It doesn't take super long, but it's also not super fast. It doesn't auto win going first, but it also isn't super bad going second. I think it's just overall all right. Dragon Link, I think is also mid, even though I do like the deck. I don't think it has any particularly great matchups. Like if you ever make it to the part of the second stage where people are taking it really serious, I don't think you're gonna see any like Tearlaments or other really good matchups. Its good matchups right now are like, they're all kind of down here. They're not up here, right? The combo takes very long going first, but most people are not gonna scoop to the dragon combo because most decks have a realistic chance of beating it. Like an average Pearly hand, an average Kashtira hand will definitely wait for the Dragon Link combo to finish. Kashtira dies to Nib. I think you underestimate the amount of people that are going to play around Nib. If Nib is popular in this Duelist Cup, people are going to play around Nib. That's another thing about these Duelist Cups. If you grind high enough in your points, you actually really have like a meta game developing. And you can actually respond to these type of trends because there are not that many people in the world that get up there. You will play against the same people again and again. There's definitely the possibility to make calls like this. And if you realize a lot of people are playing Nib in their decks, there's a way to play around that with Kashtira. Anyone remember last time during the Worlds grind when suddenly everyone was playing Exo Sister? So even though Exo Sister wasn't even that good in regular Master Duel ranked, it did well in the Worlds qualifier. These kind of things definitely matter. As much as I like Dark World, I cannot recommend you to play this deck. Exo Sister, I'm going to throw in mid, surprisingly high, honestly, even surprising for myself right now. But the more I think about it, Exo Sister is okay because I think the games with Exo Sister are relatively fast. Has a decent amount of non-engine. You can play a Rysard outs, Noir outs if you want to. You can play back row removal if you're facing a lot of Labyrinth. Like, it's relatively adjustable. Fluandereeze, I don't even know why this is still in here, but Fluandereeze from my perspective is just not really playable in Master Duel right now. I figured I would include Gishki because it is, you know, kind of a new deck on the block. However, I don't think it's very good. Blind second Kashtira is a real option for Master Duel right now, and it can definitely catch people off guard in the second stage of the Duelist Cup. You have incredible board breaking capabilities. You can play insane amounts of outs to Noir and Rysard. Like, you can play Thrust, Talents, Herald of the Abyss. You're gonna be fine to go second into these type of decks. I think it's going to be a very good option to have. The thing with these decks is that you need to be able to observe meta trends and make the right call, because if everyone is doing it, then people are going to be able to respond to it. Imagine you're playing blind second Kashtira, your opponent is playing blind second Kashtira, your opponent wins the coin flip, so suddenly you have to go first, and you're playing a deck full of like Talents and Thrust, and you're going first into your opponent's deck with Talent and Thrust. Most likely you're just going to die. So at that point it becomes a coin flip again, and you don't want to be playing something like this if people are aware of it or if other people are doing it too. In that kind of scenario, I think it's going to be very crucial to have a blind second Kashtira deck list ready for the grind. You want to observe the type of decks that you're playing against and evaluate, like, is this good right now? If you see a lot of people with Pearly and Kashtira that are picking first, maybe it's time to queue up the blind second strategies, right? MathMeg, just don't. Mikanko is kind of in the same boat as other blind second strategies. We're gonna throw most of the blind second strategies into sleeper picks because I don't think Mikanko is a particularly good deck right now. But if you notice people going first with Cash and Pearly, I think you can exploit that with Mikanko. Math is kind of viable. There's no way MathMeg is viable in an environment where a Rysard is being summoned on you. There's no shot. Like, actually not. Like, I don't think this deck is good right now. My love, Naturia Runic. It pains me to say it, but this deck is mid. Hear me out. I think this deck is still playable in ranked, but for the Duelist Cup, I would not recommend it because going first, going second, no matter what, it takes too long, unfortunately. Numeron, I hate this deck, but like I said, there is some room for blinding second in this format. Numeron, similar to Mikanko, when you go first, you are in shambles. It's really painful if people make you go first, which can definitely happen. So I still think I prefer a solid blind second Kashtira for this grind, but Numeron is like a sleeper deck that you can snag some wins with it. But as soon as you realize other people are doing the same thing, you should probably stop. Pearly, similar situation. The reason why I like these two more than the other two is when they ever have to go first, they can still function, right? You'll just have slightly worse non-engine. Rescue Ace, don't say wee-woo, wee-woo. No wee-woo, wee-wooing in Master Duel right now. Not yet. Without freaking Emergency and without Preventer, I don't even consider this deck playable. Like, unironically, yeah, this deck is like here. That being said, that does not mean you should dismantle all your Rescue Ace cards. The deck is going to be meta at some point, just as a disclaimer. Runic Stun. From a human perspective, I want to tell you guys to not do it, right? I'm gonna put it somewhere in mid though, because I mean, floodgates are one hell of a thing in best of one. I would never play something like Runic Stun on the first day. One thing you could do, for example, is you could prepare runic stun versions that specifically counter one of the top decks. Like you could make a runic stun version that is 100% anti-cash or 100% anti-Pearly. And if you ever realize that people are playing a lot of Pearly or a lot of Cash Tira, then you can maybe whip out this for like a couple games and maybe snag some quick wins with it. Because even though you might think decking out people takes a long time, if someone sees that you're flipping the right floodgates against them, they're probably going to surrender. As much as it pains me to say it, we're moving on from Melfi Sprite as a viable choice in Master Duel. I'm going to be honest with you. What is it right now? 2 blues, 1 jet, and 2 starters. I think we're reaching critical mass. And 1 beaver as well, 1 swap frog. They have just murdered too many things. I'm gonna give you Sprite enjoyers some amount of copium. There's a very small chance that you can play like a cheesy Sprite deck that gives your opponent Ibly, which is your win condition going first against Cash, against Pearly in best of 1. Ibly is probably gonna win the game, but still, Melfi Sprite in the form that we know it, I don't think is viable. Runic Sprite, it's similar to Runic Naturia. All of the Runic decks are somewhere in mid, honestly, simply because they're gonna take too long. Cash is kind of overrated. Well, I see a lot of people in chat asking again and again why I think Cash is better than Pearly. Keep in mind, this is specifically for the Duelist Cup. This is only based on the fact that Cash Tira games are way faster than Pearly. So if you maybe listened to what I said, but maybe you weren't here yet, but I do think Pearly is a better deck than Cash Tira. But we're doing this to help people prepare for the Duelist Cup. And the time a deck takes to win does matter. Your time is limited. Your mental capabilities are an important resource when you're actually grinding for that long. And I do think Pearly is an incredibly complicated deck, especially going second, figuring out OTK lines and Zeus lines and how to play through boards is incredibly exhausting. And so I don't feel bad putting it lower than Cash Tira because I played 63 hours or something in 3 days. If I'm playing Pearly for 63 hours, I'm gonna lose my mind. And that's why I think the deck is a solid option to have ready, but I don't think you can rely on it for the majority of your grind. It's gonna be too slow and it's gonna be too hard. Don't play Sword Soul. There's like no reason to play Sword Soul other than the fact that it's fast. But the only thing that Sword Soul does very fast is losing. The same is true for Trap Tricks. My biggest incentive for this was to help you guys prepare for the second stage in case anyone wants to seriously try to grind for some ranking in the second stage. Some of the decks here that I listed as mid or don't play them, keep in mind, some of it is only because they're too slow. They are completely fine for ranked play. But in the second stage, of course, time is a big resource, so some decks are better than others based off of that. When you're playing the Duelist Cup, be ready to swap decks in between when you realize that the current deck that you're playing is not working out because of all the matchups that you have. Listen to my explanations on the individual decks if you want to know what situations to play which deck in and so on and so forth. You should come prepared with multiple different decks that you're comfortable with because you don't want to spend time during the second stage building and learning a new deck, right? You should prepare those things beforehand. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've been watching it on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Appreciate every single one of you. Thank you for watching and best of luck in the Duelist Cup.